Hello everybody, welcome to the watercolor class. And today we're working with a big wash brush and a sponge, as well as any other brushes you might want to use. Today's experimental class, we're going to do two sketches. I have found this gorgeous photograph. Well, I took a photograph of the Snowdonia National Park, and I really was inspired by the wilderness, the gorgeous colors, and it's reminded me some of the work of Tony Smibbert, if I pronounced the name right. And he works in a very large scale painting. Some of his work is a couple of meters, and he works in watercolors as well. So sometimes he works in a similar technique with acrylics, but very large strokes, very atmospheric paintings. So it's really reminded me of his work. So we're going to have a quick sketch done from the artist's work, and then we'll interpret the photograph into our technique today as well. Now I have a large piece of paper in front of me today. I have an A2 piece, which I divided into half. A3 is fine, divided into half as well, or you can keep it all in one, divided with a tape. But for me to show you how I'm going to be mixing colors, I'll have a different paper here, which I'm just going to secure, and I'm going to bring my paints a bit more closer so you can see what I'll be doing with my paints as well. Right, so first of all, let's start with a sketch, with a pencil sketch, just to identify some of the shapes of our mountains, and then we'll move on to experimenting with our sponge. So first of all, I have got a very low foreground silhouette. It gently goes lower at the left and gently goes higher on the right hand side, so a little bit more flat at the front, and then gently going up. Okay, not too high, and gently going down. So we've got that natural diagonal, so it's not too boring, flat straight line. Okay, we have a little bit of light building up. It looks like we're coming up to some sort of plateau within the mountain range. Yeah, so we were climbing up. There's a plateau, it was almost like a lake, so we can maybe have a little bit of space left for some of that white. Okay, and that might be something going into the waterfall, or maybe just the light, how that lake is opening up. And most importantly, our mountains. Now we've got lots of suggestive shapes. Now first of all, let's identify where that mountain is going to be. So it's not in the center. Yeah, if I'll put a bit more in the center, it's kind of just off the center. So if this is my halfway through, if I divide the next section into half again, it will be more into the right, into the left hand side part. Okay, so somewhere here, maybe the peak of my mountain. Maybe we're going to get started on that top, that shape. Roughly, try to use lighter lines. Again, for the camera, I'm using some darker ones so we can see them. Okay, and then my mountain goes really low on the right hand side, almost like a quirky V shape. You can have a look for those indentations. There could be a bit more of your own shape if you wanted them. Nice and quirky. The little steps, sub steps. As long as they don't look too similar, I think those two steps for me look identical. So if I'll make one a bit shallower, one shorter, one longer. Okay, that's why we do that with the pencil, to give us an idea. And then we have a plateau on the left hand side, and within that overall big simplified line, maybe it's going to be finishing somewhere here. I can now shape up the curves of the mountain ridge. Something's going a bit higher, something a bit more lower. Okay, a bit more pointy, maybe a bit more flatter. Okay. And there is another little step on the left. I'm just setting off somewhere here, roughly again. It all disappears into the fog. So most of the work, most of the texture will be done with a brush. So don't worry too much about how much details you get in. What we are interested in the rough silhouette, what some of those points, cliffs going to go up or down, where those elements are going to be. It's often more easier to do it with a pencil. Then we don't need to think when we paint. We know their positioning. Okay. And I'm going to do one more element. I'm going to add one more element to the painting. It's the two very dark clouds, how they're coming up. Yeah, those dark two shapes. And then I give you some time to finish your drawing. So one is coming quite close to the mountain, so maybe quite a low diagonal. And one is almost at the edge here, which again, just a bit more of a diagonal, almost straight. Well, the whole width of it is going to be about there, yeah, but we don't really need to know exactly its direction, so something's going to go there. So that will be our paintings. That will be our drawing for the painting. Let's give you a bit more time to finish it off. Right, so I'd like us to paint very, very quickly and very, very spontaneously. And for that, we're going to be using our sponge and the very large brush, or the largest brush you can get, okay? Even if you have a smaller size paper than I have, painting with a larger brush is still much easier. So what we're going to do now, we'll practice a couple of colors, just kind of as checking what colors we're going to be using, and then we'll practice some of the strokes. So this is my scrap piece of paper, watercolor paper, which I'll do some experiments on. So let's get a bit of water, and I think I'm going to go for sky blue. Okay, let's check what my colors are, where they are. Okay, that's a violet. Okay, maybe a smaller brush will be easier for me to find my, I've got them all looking quite black here. Okay, I found it. Right, so with my bigger brush, I'm just going to use the edge of it, one of the corners of it. So I've got some nice, almost like turquoisey blue. Actually, that's quite turquoisey. Let's move it. I'm looking for okay, a couple of mucky colors as well. They with me. I think. Okay, great. Azure, sky blue, or any of your blue with a dab of emerald green will be fantastic. So we're looking for some bluey turquoisey color. So I have my fresh blue, so I've got my azure here, and I have some turquoisey color, or you could have had emerald green. Okay, so I'm going to mix those two together. Now I found both of them in my mucky palette. Okay, so something in between those two will give us a little bit more of greeny blue color. Okay, just more greeny blue color. And what we want to do with a big brush, that's why we're even testing it with a big brush. I want us to play with the widths of the brush. Just loading my brush again. And placing quite a lot of moisture, quite a lot of pigment on the paper. Okay, I'm just dragging maybe my colors. Nice, quite nice and thick. And then I'll pick up my fresh clean sponge. I'll soak it if it's still dry. Soak it, rinse it really well, so there's nothing dripping off it. I even use a tissue paper and dry my hand so nothing is dripping. Okay, and then while it's still damp, I'm going to soften some of the edges of my stroke here. That will give you quite feathery strokes. Yeah, so I'm picking up some pigment and it drags, and that's what I'm interested in, those feathery shapes of smudges. You can even dab your tissue, your sponge in the color on its own and just bring it to the painting. So you have some contrast within a stroke, and you will have some softness to it as well. So we want both. We don't want just contrasts. We don't want just softness. We want a bit of everything. And you can try to rotate your sponge, move it about, press more, press very gently, just to see what type of texture we can get. Feathery, sky-like, or maybe kind of blowing clouds like. Okay. I'm gonna wash my sponge, rinse it again really well. And I'm also going to try to lift some of the color. I can see my big blob of paint. That's why I was saying bringing quite a lot of moisture to the stroke. It's still very damp. So this is a good opportunity for me to use some strokes over it with a sponge. So if I just go and use maybe the edge of my sponge, gently, look, just lifted immediately. Yeah, it's lifted again. If I'll go over my drier sections, they will lift, but it will be much more softer. It's hardly to see. It lifts a little bit, so you're not going to have as much impact. So the more moisture you place initially, the longer time you can buy yourself to come back to those darker shapes, to smudge them. Okay. I'm going to give a bit of time to play with it. Well, I'll play with my sponge here as well by adding a bit more darker tones, maybe indigo. I can go straight away with my sponge into the paint. Okay, some nice indigo here. And I'm just going to play and add some strokes over some of my blues. Just want to enjoy the media. Just want to enjoy what type of strokes I can come up with. Just to relax my wrist, relax that anticipation of the painting going on. Okay. I can always use the other corner of the sponge. So I've got a mucky corner where I've got some paint, and I have a clean edges where I can still lift some color. So far, they don't make much sense. They're just experiments. So if I'll go and put maybe something extra darker, maybe even Payne's gray with my indigo. So if I'll put a nice extra dark tone, just as my playground area here. And then if I use a clean, soft edge of the sponge, I can create some lovely smudges. Okay. If I wash my sponge, I can also introduce some water, maybe rub certain things off. Bring a little highlight or big highlights, depending how much the surface has dried. Okay. That's a lovely, lovely playfulness of the technique. Kind of working out the movement with a now sponge, getting to know its possibilities. And those are going to be our main colors for the sky, for our artist interpretation first sketch. And we'll explore the warmer colors, some browns, once we painted the top part of the painting. So let's use those colors straight away. Now I'm going to introduce them with a brush, and then I'm going to paint with a sponge afterwards. So again, I'll go for my blue, my azure, or sometimes it could be called differently, and some emerald green or turquoise. So all we're looking is kind of for greenish blue color. The more intensive you can get it, the better, because when you start lifting it with a sponge, it will go much paler. Okay. So I'm going to have quite a bit of water here. Now it might start running here for me. So I'm just going to make sure that I have enough. Just don't want it to run off my palette from the screen. And I'll go for some key areas on the mountains where this color could be. So for example, maybe on the top of the corner here, it's only a small amount, but I will smudge it probably later on. I've got a big chunk of this area here. Just gonna add a bit more water so the area is not too dry. Okay, some more paint on this side of the slope. Okay, if you haven't started painting yet, possibly just watch me for a moment longer till I'm able to stop and talk you through things as well, and then give you some time to paint it. So now I've placed some of the blocks of the color almost like on the edge of the mountains. I want to soften some of those sharpnesses. So for example, I want to soften this vortex, that fog or cloud coming in towards the mountain. I want to soften some of those sharpness of the color here. How it will be coming in across there. Just really playful. Not too much water on your sponge. Everything's just going to run. Some of these sharpness, I can go upwards, maybe smudge them upwards. If I feel my sponge is filling up with color, I can again rinse it. Lift some color here. Okay. It doesn't mean that I've finished with those areas. I'm going to just do a tiny bit more softening on the edge of the mountain here, because I will be bringing some darker tones to it as well. But when you work with the color immediately, and soften it immediately, then you've got an opportunity to build up on top. If you leave the ridges too sharp, it might be harder for you to join other colors or other patterns. I think I can go and bring some more color here on the sky as well. So nice and soft. It's not going to end up exactly like mine or exactly like the artist's work. There's spontaneous marks. They're much more personal to all of us. Depends what's happened to the paints, how much water you've got on your sponge or on your brush, the type of paper you're using. There are loads of factors. The strokes, the confidence of the strokes you're making. I'm gonna touch up a tiny bit more of that blue, I think here on the right. Just feels like I could do with some extra darkness in here. And possibly a little bit more blue, very, very pale. I've got a very pale corner of my sponge here. I think I could do with a pale blue somewhere here. Okay, I'm gonna wait for you to do your experiments now. Right, so next one, I'm gonna get my big flat brush, wash brush. I'm gonna go for my indigo, very similar colors to what we've been using here. Indigo and some Payne's gray. I think I've got some more Payne's gray here. So nice dark tone. We will change it in tones as we'll start painting, but it will appear quite dark altogether. So if we'll start with the most dark one, so then we've got an opportunity to lift it. Now, although we want it very dark, we still need to have quite a lot of moisture. Otherwise, it's going to be running away, going to be drying very quickly from what we want to do with the sponge. Now, my darkest tones are on the peak of the mountain. So it's a key piece, and we're going to do it straight away. Now, I've got some nice two pointy edges there. So I'm just going to place my brush twice, one maybe a little bit higher point, another one a bit more lower. I've got another little pointy edge somewhere here. And maybe another one somewhere on that side. And I'm just going to connect them maybe gently with a brush, or I'll do it with a sponge later on. I'm just placing some darknesses here. Placing maybe some of the shoulders, some of that width. Now, exciting things want to come and happen there, but it's a bit too early for it because I want to paint the sky. So once I've done that area, I can stop and use my sponge now. And I can continue painting my mountain, lift some of the color and maybe reuse it elsewhere, soften some of the edges, create some of the exciting runs of the color. If you like something and it's not like mine or the artist's work, I keep saying, just keep it. If you like something, you think you might overwork it, if you've got a lovely effect going, fantastic, keep it. Maybe don't go too much in there. This is quite a sharp point. Maybe I'll just soften it there. I want to have some more softness in the base of the mountain here. So that I can top up some more. I don't want any white here, so I can just soften it. And those soft strokes allows us to build up extra texture. Okay, and there's nothing stopping us to bring the darkness back. So I'm just going to place some of the darker tones and just let them run. Okay, let them run, let them spread. I think I've got quite a lot of moisture on my brush. If I'll have a little less and place some more darkness, maybe another ridge, and let it settle. Maybe another ridge. That's quite wonderful without doing very much. And if we feel tempted to do something else, it's bravery to go ahead with it. But if we spoil it, be prepared for it. It's okay. It's part of our practice piece. we're exploring it. If you feel you have too much moisture on the paper, I can feel my mountain spread a bit too much in its width. I'll have to be patient and let it dry before lifting anything else. Otherwise, everything with a moist surface of the sponge will just disappear. So I'll give it a tiny bit of time to dry. While I can do some touch-ups of texture on the sky. Now for the sky, I'm going to use some Payne's Grey. Okay, just Payne's Grey. If you don't have Payne's Grey, just a little bit more black with your blue, kind of neutral. Well, Payne's Grey is kind of blacky blue anyway. And I'm gonna do probably with a sponge, as my brush is still loaded with a lot of dark mountain color. I'm gonna do a big stroke on the sky where we sketch those lines, pencil marks. And I'm gonna go for clean edge of the sponge, and I'm gonna create those whispery edges. If it's gonna go dark, I can always lift it, but we need to have more or less darker tone on the sky, so the mountain will sing. The mountain will stand out on the right hand side here. So I'll introduce some more gray here, which is getting lighter towards the left hand side. So just stroking it in. I don't want to see too many similar width strokes. If you're ending up with almost like an identical pattern of strokes, just be careful. I don't like this sharp edge of the clouds, so I'm just going to soften it here. We'll give increase the darkness in a couple of the areas we sketched. Just going to introduce on this damper surface a bit more darkness of the cloud, and maybe another one. You can do it by pressing on the sponge more, by lifting a bit more paint from the blocks, or just simply just pressing on the sponge a little bit more. Again, give it a try. If you end up with too much darkness, you can wash it off. Okay, got that lovely softness. Wanted to go behind the mountain. Okay, let's spread it out. Lovely. Let's give you a bit of time to do that. Okay, less is more, Julia. My marks on my masking tape, I think, distract my viewing of the painting as well. So I need to be patient before removing the masking tape and getting rid of the feathery ends of the strokes. And while my mountain got that just about started to dry, but still damp, got that surface, I have washed my sponge, I have dried it. I want to use its edge or edges to create more structure to my mountain. A little bit on the side, a bit more highlight. Got that nice edge, almost like a triangle. Okay, I've got a crisscross kind of edge. Okay, well, let's just see if we can, yeah, get rid of that soft edge. Maybe drags further out. And something a bit more soft on this side as well for me. And I'm going to wash my sponge. And maybe lift a couple of areas till they get to white or whitish. Another tip is using flat brush with a little bit of water. If you wanted to lift something small, let's say if we wanted to lift a little small area, a bit more precise. Okay, just a bit of water on the brush. Need to dry our brush. Okay, put too much dark light in there. I can bring it back. Any little highlights. Just a little bit playful time, really. I can still see my mountain now is dry, and I can still have a tiny bit more darkness in its center. Just hope it's not going to run too far. Try to direct it slightly more. Okay. I'm happy with it as it is. Let's give you a bit of time to do your version so far. I haven't done any of the other edge of the mountain or the side yet, so don't worry and don't rush in finishing everything. Now, if I'll go for the right-hand side and the left-hand side edges, I'll use probably the colors I already have on my palette, so it's not going to be too strong as my peak of the mountain. I can test it on my scrap paper, and I'll just place them almost very softly, and almost like if there is a cloud kind of going over, or yeah, kind of almost running, almost that fog runs down the mountain. You've got those kind of streaks of directions of them. Okay, maybe somewhere dragging the color across. If you need to make it a tiny bit more dark on the edges, maybe we can introduce a tiny bit more darkness. I think I need a dab of water. It's a little bit too dry for me here. Okay, just a little dots with a sponge, or you could have done it with a brush. And I'm just going to persuade them to go down again. Okay, I can always, once I've done it, yeah, I'm not sure if it's enough, if it's too much, if it's, yeah, I've got enough texture, I can always come back to it. So I'm going to prefer to stop and create extra maybe texture on the surface afterwards. So I'm going to go now for the top of the ridge, the flatter ridge here, and I think I'm going to use a brush because it brings stronger pigment and I can control the line of this ridge. Okay, maybe lower here. Okay, and then I can go with my sponge. If your sponge edges become too mucky, we need to wash them. Okay, so I'll just soften them all the way down. Slightly different diagonals for all of them, maybe. And then finally, I'll have a scooping stroke. I just need a cleaner sponge. Scooping stroke, which will take all of it together. Okay. If it's not enough darkness, or if it's not enough color, I think I could go with a tiny bit more Payne's gray on a small, while these areas are still damp. Can just sharpen up the edges, maybe just bring up extra ridges or a little bumpy silhouette. And again, just drag it a little more down. Anything what looks a little bit too unusual, too unnatural, soften it. And to make the fog more complete in this area, I'll use Payne's Grey, but lighter, and create a bit more of a base. So if my strokes will start being slightly darker, as long as they're full of moisture, I can lift them afterwards. So somewhere here, a little bit more darkness at the base. And then clean edge of the sponge. Those lovely flat diagonals. We'll do some nice, exciting strokes. We'll have to wait for it till it's dry to know, is it enough or is it too much, or can we lift something else extra? Okay, I can see that one is settling now much better. And I've got one sharp edge here which I want to soften, is somewhere here. Okay, I've disrupted it a little bit too straight, so let's bring it back partially. Good. So let's give you some time to do it as well. I'm just going to touch up my bridge here. It's a tiny bit more darker tone. And again, I just soften it. A bit more feathery ends. Like that. I'm just going to show you. I've got an acrylic short bristle brush. Just going to put it in the water, dry it on my tissue paper, and I want to do a little highlight. So if I'll rub my brush, okay, that doesn't come off. Let's do it somewhere else. Okay, a bit more softer. That must be very dry corner. Okay, let's do it somewhere else then. Okay, a little bit sharper now. I wash the brush, I dry the brush. I'll have another little ridge maybe somewhere here. Okay. These three blocks are looking a bit too similar for me, so that's another one I'm interested in changing or adding or working with the highlights. That's already better. Maybe this could have a dab of darkness, much more sharper. That's better. Now my gray in the middle between those two dark clouds has dried very lightly than I wanted. So suddenly we've got a big opening. So I quite like that sharpness of the white on the right-hand side. And you have to have that more solidness of gray. So I think I'll have to top it up. So I'll just introduce that darkness over and just make sure it blends with my existing shapes. I think that will be better. I had to go over my darks as well, otherwise my darks became very similar to new tones. So things could be amended and worked into if we don't rush and give ourselves time to think as well. Okay, that's more vibrant sky. I think a little bit more gray on the corner for me. You might have done it straight away perfectly. So that's where we will, when we work with loads of diluted paints, sponge surfaces, sometimes dry, slightly different to how we predict they will. That's good, I like that. Nice and whispering. I've got this lovely valley. Okay, what's this? Uneven shape. That's better. I don't want any zigzaggy edges. It to be a bit more straighter. That's better. And now let's go and check what colors we might need for the foreground. We have a beautiful kind of a brick and brownie color, brick orangey brick. I think it's also called English rose, kind of almost copperish type of color, copperish red. If you haven't got it, any of your browns with some orange or with some orangey reds. Okay. Burnt umber is another lovely color for the foreground. That's got some more of that warmth in it. Actually, that's not burnt umber. I think that's sienna. And that's just umber. Sorry, that's will be my burnt umber. So any of those kind of more. If the first color more reddish and orange, the other one has more blue in it, a bit more cooler brown. You can use one of your browns as a base and just add red to it, and you'll have your one color. You can add more blue to it, and you can have another tone of color. Okay. And we'll still use a bit of indigo and Payne's gray to get the colors going. So I'll put a bit of indigo and I'll put a bit of Payne's gray next to it. So warmer brown, cooler brown. And we're probably going to make a cooler brown by using indigo. The technique here is going to be using the wash brush to apply some water to the foreground. Okay, so I'm just going to use some clean water. I'm going to apply it all over the foreground, maybe even a tiny bit higher than my line. And all the way from the other side. Where I have left a little bit of white area, you can preserve it white if you can. If not, we can try lifting it later on. I'm just going to paint all of that area with water. And I'll go with a big brush again, straight away for my orangey brown. And I'll go maybe even add extra orange to it. Okay, that's lovely. And while it's a wet surface, I'm just going to skim it through. Okay, I need much more stronger color pigment. Much more stronger pigment. Okay, that's better. If it runs, that's okay. I want that pigment to be bold. And maybe a small amount of it's going to be here. And a little bit more on the other side. While the colors are still wet, I'll immediately go into my raw umber or any of the cooler browns. Okay, I'm just going to introduce some more of them on in the center. Because I'm painting on top of the wet layer of paint, the colors come out much lighter. So the darker pigment you can pick up, the better. And now I'm going to introduce very quickly some indigo, almost no water, whatever moisture I've got on my brush. I haven't washed my brush. I'm just going to dab it in my paint, just to have some very sharp points. Yeah, so if I just dab it into my painting, maybe do some stronger lines, maybe do some blocks, can top up the paint to keep it sharp. Yeah, maybe put some happy dots. So when we place a few strokes just solidly. Okay, maybe just leaving a few things out. All right, have cleaner brush, just dragging some of this color down. Okay, slightly different possibly directions as well. And then I'm going to go for my Payne's Gray and Indigo. I'm going to make a nice dark corner on the bottom right. Drag that color, maybe keep topping it up. I do apologize, it's reflecting in that corner because the paper's gently buckled there. And if I need to introduce any other darks, there's a cliff edge coming down. Okay. Now we might end up with a variety of tones and the variety of bordering surface. So if we've got the contrasts of the surface, we'll have some soft edges. I think my edges are too sharp at the moment, so I think I'm happy to introduce some softness to some of the existing edges. That's much better immediately. Maybe this one will go slightly, even if that orange is not quite perfectly linked. It's suggestive. Quite like this nice softness, but I think it might just need to go further up, or maybe just links with something else. I need to help myself with the smaller brush. We can help ourselves with the smaller brush. The amount of white I've anticipated to have has reduced, but that's okay. I can just use my brush straight away and just lift some of it. If you're not sure if you've got a nice foreground and you feel it might just actually ruin your foreground by lifting color, don't lift anything. Okay. I think I could bring some more stronger brown here. I've got very similar edges. I think that's better. So working on top is another option. Bringing a nice strong pigment over. I quite like that. So if at any point you feel like you spoiled it, continue being brave and rescue it. And my paint is running there. I think that will be a fabulous opportunity for it to, when it dries, to see some beautiful marks. I see a lot of similarity in my strokes of how paint settles. So that's why I picked up a sponge and started introducing some smudges or lifting. So that's my natural gut instinct. Tells me that something needs the variety. Okay, that's quite nice. That is quite nice there. Lovely. Going to make a tiny bit more of a ridge here. Otherwise, the rest of the surface looks too even. Maybe a little bit bumpy on the surface. That's better, so it's not such a straight line after all. Lovely. I think I'm going to stop with this piece. Just going to pick up some water so it doesn't take too much time to dry. Just using a brush, I'm lifting it off my masking tape, not the actual painting. Just gonna letting it seep through and gently collecting it and drying it on my paper towel and collecting it again if it's still settling there. Okay. Lift tape. Best to lift it when the painting is dry, so then you don't tear the paper. If it's a little bit damp, I think this is a good tape. It comes off quite nice and easily. So we've got a nice fresh piece. The bottom part's still reflecting, but actually had settled beautifully. Really like that one. Really nice and exciting. Right, so let's put this one aside. And let's have another piece over. Right, so let's have a look at our photograph now and do a quick sketch and then I'll analyze what we're going to be doing with it. Now, first of all, I'm going to find this quirky V shape of the valley with a very shallow shape, just off center. So if that V point, if this is the halfway through of my photograph, so it's a little bit more on the right hand side of it. So if that's halfway through of my paper, so that V shape is going to be somewhere pointy, somewhere here, and then it's going to go up. Okay. Lovely, nice ridge at the top, gently going down. Okay, maybe somewhere gently going down. Let me make some darker lines, almost like little steps, but we don't want them to be too similar in size or maybe directions. They're slightly different. But we've got that beautiful ridge, softer ridge. Okay. And we've got the V shape of the mountain. Let's just think about the peak of the mountain first, where that lovely shape is going to be. And then a darker silhouette almost from the top corner, reducing down and trimming our mountain. Okay, somewhere there. So we've got nice triangular shape, quite a shallow, longer line, which will get lost in the shadows. So if we can't see it, we don't sketch it. Now there are some more details on the ridge. We'll come back to them. What I'm interested in where we've got this V shape. I can even get it more pointy here now, because I can see there's some more little horizon, maybe some more mountains, maybe actually it's part of the angle C So if we are looking down from Snowdon edge somewhere, so within that V-shaped point, we have a very bright, bold, yellowy, orangey shape where the sun suddenly lit up the area here. And we've got this rock standing on it. Okay, and this ridge. So that's important because we've got a very bold light and very sharp contrasts in there. Then we have a beautiful rock. So there are loads of details. I could have looked at one mountain and given you loads and loads of outlines for things. We're looking for the main important things, not to get lost within composition. Now, where I have my pointy mountain on the left, somewhere below, there is that rock, almost as if I were to put, it's not right underneath of it, to give the dynamics to the painting. If we move it further, so we've got that almost like width of the mountain, yeah, almost like using it to descend. So then I can have an edge of my rock here, tiny bit sharper, pointy, and then it's widths, a darker tone, with a little friend light pattern of a friend box next to him. Okay, so I use loads of lines to identify what that shape is going to be before I make my mind about which one's going to be final one. Looks like another rock coming up here with some sort of light. Again, I'm not too interested in details. I'm more interested in where that light is going to be. So when I'll be working with a sponge, I'll know where to leave some highlights or where to reduce darkness. Okay. I prefer to have some angled shapes. They give me much more structure. Okay, that was my supportive line, but I don't really need it. And I have a light slope on the right hand side here as well. Now what I need to look out here for is that my shadow and my highlights are not going to be the same size. So the highlights on the mountain are going to be narrow, so that's going to be roughly where my highlight's going to go. That's going to be my shadow. Then it's going to be all of that's going to be all together big shadow. So if I'll make the shadow a little bit larger, and then this highlight on the ridge is going to be narrower. That's probably going to be somewhere my highlight area. And to define any other shapes, I think I'll just work with tiny bit that beautiful steep mountain we've done on the left. Just don't want that perfect straight lines on it. So now I'll have tiny bit of play of ridges, top, a bit more bumpy tops as we're going further into the valley. Yeah, those mountains will stand out as individual shapes. Now I've done some lines for you just to understand what's happening, but they're just in the shadow, so we don't really see any of it. Okay, so we don't really need too much of that. And then I'll do one more line for the clouds, and we're ready to start painting. A nice diagonal coming across our V shape somewhere here, maybe touching up on the corner. That will give us a nice darkness over some of the highlights. Sorry, another one more line to finish the shadow on the foreground. Let's find a bit more of a shape coming across. There's a lovely orange coming across, but there's also a lovely shadow. There is a small rock on the side. We see small light. Again, we can do that as we start painting, but I'm going to identify it now. So that's a nice shadow here coming through. Now the definitely drawing is finished. Right, so we're ready to start painting. My plan will be to work into some lighter tones very quickly, build them up, and then charge on with some darker tones. So if I were to work with some paler blues, turquoisey, and maybe stronger ultramarine blue, and then work into some warmer colors on some of the highlights of the mountains, and then we'll just go and charge in a very strong color for the shadows of the mountains. So we used our turquoisey color before. Let me just wipe this palette. Okay, turquoisey color. I'm gonna go maybe straight away with a sponge this time. If you want to carry on with a brush, that's fine as well. And that is going to be somewhere at the bottom of my mountains that I can paint over the mountain shapes, over pencil marks, because they're going to be much darker and we're not going to see them, those lines. Now I created a bit of tension rather than just plain color. I've got something lighter, something darker, something sharper, something softer. Now I'll go for my blue, ultramarine, or sky blue. I think ultramarine will be better, got more of a coolness to it. I'm going to leave a little bit of space for some of the clouds, and I'm going to paint a bit of sky underneath or in between the clouds. Just dabbing a few strokes, really relaxing my wrist, not overthinking. Where I've got two sharp lines close to the mountains, I'll soften them. Some more paler blue somewhere on the side. And any more stronger ultramarine, maybe even a dab of violet with it, I'll use for the top of the mountain. I think I'm gonna go a little bit wider, softer. Now my mountain's gonna have some warmth to them, so I'm going to keep them clear, or if there is color on them, it will be just diluted. So then our ochres and oranges and reds are not going to be mixing up with them, with the blue and giving us loads of green. So I've got some plainer color, paler color, maybe a bit more stronger here. Maybe a bit more stronger in pigment. Excellent, and it immediately takes me to some of those darknesses of the clouds. So my clouds will have some of that Payne's grey and indigo, or Payne's grey and black, and a hint of violet with them. So it'll be a little bit warmer. Let me have a look where my violet is. Okay, that's not my violet, that's why it doesn't get any more violet-y. Okay, I think my violet is here. Okay, so if I'll mix them together here, a bit more Payne's grey and violet, dab of indigo in it. Just want to have all of that lovely dark cloud building up. There's might be a bit of darkness over here. Nice creative clouds. If I'll have a dab of orange on my sponge without washing it too much, I could have a bit of warmth on the tops of the clouds. It doesn't make it orange enough. Okay, that's better. It's almost similar colors we use for part of the grasses. If you end up with some just more violets and grays, that's fine as well. But I think that will make a nice connection. A lovely, nice connection. Just soften it here. It's a gap for my mountain, so let's leave it there and just soften. I'm just waiting for the paints to settle, and if there are any sharp edges, I can start seeing them. That's quite an unusual, not quite pleasant smudge, so I can work into that with an odd stroke. One of the other strokes, that's better. Or if I wanted to have a tiny bit more work on my very white cloud, I can do a couple of dubs of blue there. Not much happened, so let's do strong go on. At this stage, if you want to do a brush, that's fine as well. A little brush will be fine. So I'll let it all run. I'll let it all be spontaneous. The only things I do correct or kind of add on is if things are running, like again this one, there's more water there and it just separates it too much. I wanted more of a shape rather than, well, that's quite nice. I ended up with some extra ternary stroke. Okay, let's support it elsewhere here. That's Julia's improvisation on something what didn't work. A bit of light going through. Sometimes different shapes dry differently. I don't know if you might have not noticed, but I've got it almost like a crossing pattern. Somehow paint run down that area and just eaten away the surface. So I might have to improvise and fix that. Okay, that's less visible and it's gone now. Now, the foreground and all our mountains, we're going to paint them together, similar to what we've done with the clouds. We're just going to identify some of our warmer colors first. I love some of this orange. I've got this, it's called golden, so it's a bold orangey yellow color. If you wanted to have some more yellow to it, that's quite good as well. If we'll go for a bit more even stronger orange, I'm just going for the next red and mixing them together as I'm going along. So we can see it somewhere in the foreground is going to happen. We can see maybe diluted version that's in the mountain. So any of those variations will go for some of the highlights we're going to have for the grasses, as well as we can have one of our lighter greens mixed with our yellows and oranges. So anything we had on the sponge first, mixed with a little bit of lighter green, something like that will do the trick. Okay. Now stone has a lot of light tones, but not as yellow. So I probably will use some of the paler ochres, maybe even still dab of orange, but much more diluted. And then we'll go for the shadows. And the shadows could be anything from our violets to violet and green to violet and indigo, any variety whatsoever. You can decide, maybe more distant mountains will have more blue, maybe some of the shadows of the stone will have more blue, maybe some of the slopes will have a hint of green in it, but the rest could be any of your combination of colors. Right, brief outline. I don't want you to remember it. I want you now to have a play with your warm colors. So if I'll go for my yellow and orange, so I'm going to apply all the warmer tones first. So lovely yellowy orange first, and that's going to come up on this corner, lovely and bold. Okay, all the way to this lighter rock, and I'm going to move on to an orangey, a bit more deeper orangey color. And let's give it a nice edge here. I'm going to make it bigger and stretch it out further because I can go with the darker tones over it. Nice strong colors. Again, the same for the shadows here. I can introduce more darker tones and greens over it. And I've got a greenish color now coming up on the corner under the rock here. So I'm just going to immediately mix my pale green with the colors I've got on my sponge and just bring it across. If you want to have a tiny bit more, and that's maybe too strong of green, let's take it off. I quite like the stronger browny orangey kind of color here. Nice and soft. I don't want the rock to stand out on its own, so I'm just going to rinse my sponge gently and use any of the colors we just had, probably more diluted, this green version, maybe more diluted version of it, so it stays there as a pale ochre altogether. Now if you see some white gaps of my paint at the bottom of my paper, that's my masking tape. All my painting is covered in this corner. My masking tape is very pale light, so you're probably not going to see much changes in there. Okay, so any more of the orange red in this area, maybe getting some extra boldness, some of the shadows moving across the field. We can add anything sharper and exciting down this valley. Right, I'm going to stop at that. That's it. And some more orange is going to be on a couple of more slopes. So go again, more yellowy orange, with more stronger concentrated orange than red. And I'll introduce it on our edge where we've sketched a shadow, not shadow, light and a shadow. Okay, I went over my stone, so I can just smudge it and soften it. And maybe this rock will have some light on it. Maybe some more light on the mountain. which stands out. I'm going to paint all of it, even there are loads of shadows. It will be easier for me to do the shadows over that color. Even if they're looking a little bit similar, we can change them once we start overlapping the colors. We can add a bit more hint of maybe reds or some paler shapes. But for now, I'll soften its edges so they don't have too sharp tones. Okay. And then the mountain on the right hand side will have loads of reds in it. So if you go for any of your darker reds, anything kind of purpley reds or any crimson type of reds, and just dilute it gently so it's not super dark. So I haven't again washed my sponge. Whatever was on it, parts of that green, parts of that orange and yellow. So that's why this mountain isn't going to be having a clean red color. It will have more of diluted, almost like maroon or diluted soft orangey reds. I can make it slightly varied in its color. So if I'll just paint it a little bit more over, keeping the edges soft because we're going to have loads of darker tones coming up. But to make it slightly varied, I'm going to add a dab of violet to my paint mixture here. And just very lightly brush through some of the sections. If I went over my stone, I can again brush over my stone. Don't want any white there. Okay, so that brings us closer to the shadow we want to apply. And the final one is our rock. Remember we said we're going to do something lighter tone with it. I think this grayish, that violetish red, very diluted over all of this area where the lighter surface of the rock will be, or any other of your paler orangey colors. You might even have a little hint of different color on each corner. That just will give extra excitement to the painting there. So we painted more warmth that we actually we'll end up with, but that's totally fine because we can overlap. So now I'm going to add a bit more of shadows, lighter shadows on the foreground. I want to see some of the green developing next to the stone, but I don't want it to be bold green. I want some sort of similar kind of orangey green, but in a shadow. So how do I do that? Because I need to have similar colors and add some violet to it. So if I'll go for my stronger orange, my lighter green, maybe a little bit more concentrated, both pigments. And I'll have a hint of violet with it. Okay. Maybe a tiny bit more green there. Lovely. Now, part of the area already have some orange on it. So I'm going to leave that one out for the moment. So I'm going to go for the area around my rock. Somewhere close. I've got this hidden part of a rock here as well. If I can remember to leave it out. If you don't, you don't, or maybe you can try lifting it off. Okay, maybe something lighter tone coming across here. Okay, this shadow is spreading out. Looks like some sort of grass is coming up. Right, I'm not going to go into the details, otherwise we're going to lose a picture. So, okay, forget about the grasses. And let's look at some of them. Tiny bit more stronger green, because I'm going to paint over the existing orange layer. If I leave some of the gaps of the orange, maybe there is a bit of highlights, that's good. If you lose that, that's fine as well. Got some softness going on with some of these shapes. And then I'm going to charge up the color with much more stronger violet. I'll go for direct violet. I can create some stronger silhouettes. Now, if you don't want to paint with a sponge, because I'm starting to be a little bit more precise with it, with some of the shapes, pick up a smaller brush so I can have some of the shadows here. I just find it's easier doing it with a sponge. Okay, I've got some shadows in there. I've got some shadows under the rock, even more darker tone. Maybe I can even paint the shadow of the rock itself. Okay, some extra darkness could come in later on, but I think that's enough of that. And so those are my darks, but not the most dark tones. I'm still building up. I want to have some air seen within the painting. I want some transparency. Right, I can see some similar tones on the edge of this mountain. Now I'll be picking up a brush shortly. Just want to have a big soft edge done, kind of keeping it damp. And this mountain had loads of extra red, maybe some extra red or violet to come across, maybe that nice light softly falling here. Okay. And while it's still wet, I'm just gonna wash my sponge and just clean the bottom of my lovely yellow hill. That's better. I want to use my larger brush with some stronger indigo and violet together. And I just want to press against some of the ridges here, maybe not all of them. So we do have some space and variety, space between the darknesses. Okay, building up some more extra darker tone on the bottom, maybe. That ridge could be there as well. That's quite nice. But I don't want this one to be too sharp. Okay, and that's the distance. It now appears too light, so let's soften it. Let's soften it with a tiny bit more darker tone. Okay, let's do that one as it is. Leave it as it is. Put some boldness of light, maybe some right here, still a bit more. Right, and let's do some more mountains again with the brush. I'm going to continue with darker mountains on the center of our V shape of our valley. But as we said earlier, we're going to go for more blue. So maybe more indigo or blacky blue. Or even a smaller brush to have some of the pointy edges of the painting more precise, so I can just get a little bit more precision for some of the peaks which we penciled. And then I can just drag the colors down. So my blue is going to continue on the shadow of this mountain. Shadow, shadow, shadow. A little bit flat color, a little bit too similar color. So we can go for any of the colors on our palette. Any of that warmth picking up. And I'm going to get all of that valley painted together. And even get some extra light in it. Nice solid orange going through the valley there. Let's see how it will spread and settle. That's again, it's a silly nuance which could make the difference. Don't want any white. We're going to let it settle there while working on other details. Now let's make the peak of the mountain here a bit more violet-y, but the shadow next to it again more bluey, so it will kind of start connecting it. So we don't want to go for every shadow blue or every shadow violet. Okay, so I have my violet and Payne's gray, maybe a hint of orange with it. Makes it slightly more exciting in color. Okay, so nice sharp line on the edge here. Maybe a nice peak. Okay, let's work on the edge here, slightly up or down. Okay, I'm almost doing a line, but then I'm going to soften it with my sponge. So that's will start blending over. That's a nice smudge there with texture, just gives us immediately good effects of that's a ridge, is that's the wind, is that's the heather, is that's lovely softness. Okay. And I'll have the same color on the edge next to my foreground rock, because we're going to have again violet, blue, violet. So I've got variety going on, and I'm going to just smudge it in and out for some feel for grasses. Some grassy textures. Okay. And then my final shadow on the big mountain on the left is going to have some indigo and Payne's gray. If I were to make my mountain the most dark on the most left, the whole attention of the painting is going to go there. So I'm going to, if I'll make the darkest tone in the center, well, it's going to be wrong because of the perspective. And again, it's going to just change the tension. So I'm going to keep the tension somewhere around this area and make it slightly lighter towards the left and right. So let's have that darker tone, nice and sharp. If we wanted to have more character line, that might blend with the ridge of the mountain there. Just taking it slightly lower and maybe gently lighter, all of that shape, Looks like we've got some sort of trees or texture, whatever that is. Not too sure. So it's slightly more transparent to the middle end, to the middle area. Quite like this. These whites left. I might just let them settle as they are. I'll soften one of them. Looks like some sort of snow or I quite like that finding. Okay, and let's bring my darker blue, well, not overly dark, but that lighter version of it, a bit more forward. And I did want to smudge some of this blue into my mountain at the back, so it suddenly starts connecting to it. But suddenly we've got that two-dimensional technique for it. Yeah, I've got that volume. I quite like that. And that gives me an opportunity to compare it and maybe do similar on the right hand side, maybe just touching small amount of the rock on the right and then just giving it a little smudge. Where's my mucky end? Somewhere here. If you were happy with that mountain and thought, right, I don't really want to do anything else with it, it might be better, it might not be, but I'm really happy with it, don't touch it. I think I'm doing a double darker now because it's smudged not quite the way I wanted it. That's okay, let it soften, let it dry, but this one could settle now. Now, much more darker tone on my mountain here gives me an opportunity to lighten something there as well. But sharpen maybe this contrast. That's better. That shadow might come in stronger as well. Okay. That edge happened much more spontaneously, much more freer. I had a bit more of a plan and think, and I've got a bit of tissue here as well. Okay, now I've got the next light line there. It's okay. Right, and then final strokes for the shadow of my rock here. I'll use a bigger brush. Smaller brush would have been fine as well, just to get some darkness. My brush is splitting in quite exciting way, actually. The shadow under this rock. Shadow a little bit more at the base. And for the rock hiding in the grasses. And then if I use my brush, just gently to elongate some lines, that's we'll see extra textures for some of these grasses. Or any cracks on a stone, or any other texture. And I think I'll do a small shadow for the rock on the other side. I nearly forgotten about him. Bit more coolness. I think we're done. And if you really, really, really wanted to spoil your painting, you can put a bird somewhere flying. I think I'm going to put a little bird. Again, I can practice it. I'll just make it slightly larger for you on the practice paper, a little V shape, maybe just placing a stroke and then lifting it very quickly. I think I'm going to do a small bird somewhere here. That might be quite nice, a little hint of point of interest. So our exciting painting is done now with the sponge and the big brush.